I was in Belgium recently with the IRU, or the International Road Union, and we were talking around a number of challenges that face the industry. And skill shortage is significant in Europe, as it is in America and around the world. And particularly, there is a driver shortage, quite a pronounced one in some countries. And historically, certainly 20 years ago, I think the number of European drivers supporting the industry masked the underlying issue. So I don't think it's an issue that's happened in recent times.
But the government have now made some real changes to the apprenticeship model, taken away some of the barriers, things like the length of the course. So in the past, previously, an LGV apprenticeship course would last 12 months. And that did put off a lot of employers and learners. But you can now do an apprenticeship in 8 months.
Ultimately, we have, as consumers, have to accept that things will not be delivered within minutes to our door, or we might have to go to, maybe a cynical remark, to McDonald's ourselves rather than have a person on a motorcycle deliver it for us to eat. I think there's a multimodal consumer impact as well, potentially.
They're in a process at the moment of being updated, so all apprenticeship standards get regularly updated, and they will be including zero emission vehicles in their next update. Well, to expect a college to be able to fund an electric truck, we know that they're expensive pieces of kit. How we expect a college to be able to utilise their funds to pay for that, I don't know. And that's where we need this extra investment, this capital expenditure.
We're not overstating the point. There's a skills shortages across the economy. And we've highlighted the fact there's particular one around drivers, of HGV and coaches, actually. And I believe vans to some degree. And it's a key economic enabler to drive economic growth and to drive enterprise and to start to develop the UK as a country back. What would the message be to Patrick, Fadden, Sally, from your perspective? Hello, I'm Richard Smith, Managing Director of the RHA, and welcome to the next edition of Roadway, the podcast. And today we're going to talk about probably one of the biggest challenges facing the industry and other industries, the skills. So particularly focusing around drivers, mechanics, and other relevant skills for the coach, van and haulage sector. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Kevin Birch from TRS, who are our training apprenticeship providing partner. That's a big title. And Sally Gilson, who's our head of policy. So, Kevin, Sally, good afternoon and welcome. Skills, haulage, coach, vans. Kevin, what are the main challenges that you see around the area in the next 2 to 3 years?
So I've worked in the logistics recruitment industry for the last 40 years. And since then, I've never seen sort of the skill shortages that are existing now. So you've got companies struggling to recruit sort of planners, HGV drivers, mechanics, supervisors, managers. And you only have to go onto the job platforms on the website to see how many vacancies are being advertised to see the extent of the problem. And given the governments are planning to build 1.5 million houses over the next 5 years, the haulage sector is crucial in making that happen. And if they can't attract, train and retain enough drivers, enough staff, then they're not going to be able to hit that target, in my opinion.
Sally, and from an RHA perspective, and the stakeholders that you speak to ranging from government and from local authorities, what's their view of the skill challenge that faces this industry? Are they aware of it? Is it something that they have a plan for?
Yeah, there's definitely an awareness. And I think it really depends in terms of who you're speaking to as to the level of the knowledge of the problems within our sector. Certainly, in the past, we have managed to achieve quite a bit in terms of getting that emergency funding when we had that critical skills shortage. I think the problems that we potentially have now is because there's been so much restructuring within government. We're having these same conversations again with another group of people. So it's just raising that awareness again, from switching our attention from Department for Education to Department for Work and Pensions, which obviously we are doing and we're working hard to do. I think there are so many demands on skills funding at the moment that that's a problem that I don't think they fully understood coming into government.
So just to build on that, so when we talk about skills funding, a word that I certainly hear bandied around a lot, and I think is confusing sometimes to the industry, is that of apprenticeships. So, and recently, I think Circular Star, when I say it properly, highlighted the importance of apprenticeships and actually to refocus the funding and the levy and how people can draw that down. So, Kevin, from your perspective, just what is an apprenticeship? How does it work at a high level? And why do you think, if indeed it is, it's misunderstood by the industry?
So an apprenticeship is a training program that's applicable to anyone above the age of 16 years of age, and the various levels. So level 2, which is the GCSE qualification. Level 3 is the equivalent of an A level, and level 4, 5 and above are degree levels. And they're applicable to both existing employees or new starters. And many companies use them to provide the apprentices with the knowledge, skills and behaviours to be competent in the role that they are going to do.
And some of this industry is made up of SMEs, so small, business enterprises. 85% is less than 15 trucks, which is almost micro size in the government's definition. What are the barriers from an SME using the current apprenticeship mechanism and left the funding available?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues we have is that because these are such small businesses, they don't have an HR team, they don't have a learning and development team. And there's a lot of admin that goes with running an apprenticeship. And I think once you've got over those hurdles, the positives outweigh the negatives. But when you are a small business, it's difficult as well, trying to just find work for that apprentice to do whilst they're learning. And I think it's just understanding that person's not going to be very productive to start off with. But equally, you can't just have them sat in the corner making cups of tea and coffee. And I think it can be quite daunting for a small business then trying to sort of work out how to deal with that. But certainly the administrative burden can be quite difficult if you don't have that expertise.
What would you say, Kevin, to an operator that's never engaged with the apprenticeship programme?
I would say the apprenticeship programme is a really, really good way of addressing the skills gap and upskilling employees to be competent in the role that they want to do.
And again, going back to a point I asked at the beginning of the interview from a national perspective, I know that obviously, TRS is very much a national provider, and obviously we're a four nations provider, supporter of the industry. Describe the skill shortage from a driver and mechanics perspective, because those are the two areas that are quoted to me, as managing director of the RHA, often by our members and obviously members of the industry. So from a driver perspective, is there a regional imbalance of drivers, or is it everywhere where there's a shortage? And likewise from mechanics.
In my opinion, and the stats are showing that there's currently a shortage of around about 200,000 drivers over the next 5 years, and that's nationally. It's not just in one set region; it's across the whole country. And with regards to mechanics,
so mechanics again, it's because we are national businesses. We've got hauliers down from Cornwall to Aberdeenshire, so all of those businesses need the technicians. So there is no particular region that is suffering more. What I will say with the problem with technicians, though, is that there are areas where there isn't a local college or a training provider. So if you look at the southeast, it's almost like a training desert when it comes to gaining that access to the skills, which definitely exacerbates the problem, because straight away then it's not just you're putting someone for an apprenticeship, you're also having to pay for the accommodation cost to send that person away to learn their skills.
So stay on the mechanics, and so what is the answer to that challenge, do you think, Sally, going forward?
So I think one of the big issues that we need to see government address is the cost of putting on the course. So we managed to get an increase in the funding for the actual apprenticeship standard. It still doesn't really cover the cost of the apprenticeship. But the biggest issue we've got coming up is that they're in a process at the moment of being updated. So all apprenticeship standards get regularly updated. and they will be including zero emission vehicles in their next update. Well, to expect a college to be able to fund an electric truck, we know that they're expensive pieces of kit. How we expect a college to be able to utilize their funds to pay for that, I don't know. And that's where we need this extra investment, this capital expenditure. So that colleges can invest in quality equipment for people to learn on. And that's been one of the issues with regards to the number of colleges providing the course. So if you go back a decade, and there are over 100 colleges and training providers doing the technician course. We're now down to less than 40. So the moment you take away that access to training, you're really affecting the number of people that can actually sort of learn those skills.
And again, these skills are something that at this moment in time cannot be replaced by AI or a bot or technology.
No, you still need someone, well, until you can create a robot with a spanner or a robot that, well, you probably will be able to create robots that can change tires eventually, but we are not at that space at the moment, and that's not going to change for a long time. You are going to need that interaction of a person to fix a truck for a long time yet.
And just picking up on your point, thanks, Sally, Kevin. And the RHA produced a very good skills report this year, which basically highlighted the fact that we needed 40,000 drivers for the next 5 years, which I think is where the 200,000 part of that comes from. Yeah. And then last year saw the last reiteration of the driver CPC, and we've had a dropout rate from there. And we know that from a driving perspective, we've got an aging workforce. It's of my generation, and it's moving forward. What challenges do you think the industry has got of attracting the next generations into this sector to drive trucks, which could be an 8 to 12 hour shift around the country, no start or finish time, facilities that are underinvested?
I think it's a massive challenge, to be honest with you, Richard. And, Keir Starmer, the government, are targeting the NEETs. So there's 1 million NEETs. NEETs are people who are not in education, employment or training between the age of 16 and 24. And the problem we've got at the moment is career advisors and job centres, they're not promoting haulage logistics as a career choice. And obviously they're promoting engineering, IT, manufacturing, construction, but unfortunately the logistics industry is not on the radar. So what I think we need to do is we need the job centre coaches, we need career advisors, we need training providers, employers to be going into schools and colleges and to talk about the opportunities that exist within the sector. I mean, we over the last few years, we've trained 500 plus LGV drivers. We've trained 200 transport warehouse operations supervisors, which includes the transport management CPC, which is delivered by the RHA. And more recently, we are delivering a course called the Traffic Operator Level 2 Apprenticeship. And if you look at the people that have come on them courses, many of them are between the ages of 60 and 24 years of age. And they didn't have a clue what they wanted to do until they joined the company and started the apprenticeship. And now many of those individuals are driving trucks, working in transport offices, and they're very happy in what they're doing and paid very well for doing what they're doing. And I think as well, we need to highlight the career opportunities that exist. So, some of those individuals over time may want to be supervisors, managers, and they can use the apprenticeship pathways to do that, to give them the skills and to be supervisors and managers. And we've got plenty of examples. So we're working with some really big players. So Next, Asda, John Lewis, are some of the bigger companies that we work with. But equally, we're working with hundreds of SMEs, many of them are RHA members. And we can show you sort of case studies and examples of people between the ages of 16 and 24 who've actually used the apprenticeship pathways to do exactly what I've said.
Well, I think there's some really good points there, Kim, which I'd just like to unpack it a little bit, and particularly around the social mobility question, Sally. So, I use this as an example, and I think probably all three of us can testify to this, that I'm a good example of I left university as it was with not a real clear pathway what I wanted to do. Started working in a warehouse, actually, driving a forklift truck. And then here I am as the managing director of the RHA. Having worked in operations and the way through. And from our perspective, Sally, our being the RHA, you know, what are our asks for people like the Department for Education in terms of, you know, school curriculums and increasing that awareness? Because it's got to be surely not as easy as Kevin described, but it's about getting it onto people's radar that this industry exists.
Yeah. And I think just build on what Kevin was just saying, it is about educating the educators, because we can't expect teachers, careers advisors to know every single job that there is out there. So it's sort of on us to promote our sector as well. But you know, there is an element that I think the government do have to try and stick to their targets with regards to careers advice. And they need to ensure that careers advisors do have a really good brief on what's available, especially in their local communities. You know, if you go to the West Midlands, if those careers advisors are not talking about logistics, and you know, they really should, because you mentioned already about the social mobility aspect. There are so many entry-level positions that young people can get into. It's a really easy access sector. They don't necessarily need a strong academic background. It's not to say that you can't come via a university route, but I think there's a lot of entry-level positions where, yes, you might start off at more of a minimum wage level, but we all know what's available from beyond that. You know, you can become a driver, you can become a transport manager, you can become the MD of a business. You know, so many of our members started off from that route. So there's this real possibility to earning really good money. And I think it's the side of things that maybe our educators don't understand. And that's for them to learn, definitely. And it's on the government to enforce the Gatsby protocols that were brought in, but also it is on us to get out to those schools and talk about it. I know that obviously most people will understand there's a truck, but I think it's also then to us to explain everything that goes on behind the truck.
I think, you know, I was in Belgium recently with the IRU, or the International Road Union, and we were talking around a number of challenges that face the industry, and skills shortage is significant in Europe as it is in America and around the world, and particularly there is a driver shortage, quite a pronounced one in some countries. And historically, certainly 20 years ago, I think the number of European drivers supporting the industry masked the underlying issue. You know, so I don't think it's an issue that's happened in recent times. But Kevin, you know, initially, what do you think the impact of Brexit has had on skills in this area? Has it had any? Has it had a little bit? Or is it the fact that the drivers have returned to their homeland and no longer want to come back for a variety of reasons?
Yeah, I think Brexit has had a huge impact, and especially with the driver shortage. I mean, in the peak, there were as many as 60 to 70,000 HGV drivers, Eastern European drivers in this country. And I think now that we've lost the access to the EU drivers, it has had a major impact on the shortage of drivers in the UK.
And in terms, I think you've alluded to this before, and this is a question for Sally more so. So as you know, travel around and speak to our members, driver retention is an issue.
Yeah.
And what's their view of what they can do? Is it about paying a driver more, for example, or are we just creating an unviable position by doing that?
So I think we can safely say that since 2021, the salaries for drivers have gone up significantly. I mean, I think we all remember the front page headlines of it was the battle was on with the supermarkets, tried to pay ever increasing sort of signing on bonuses. I think it's kind of plateaued out a little bit now in terms of the salary, but it is a good salary. I think the bit that we really need to be conscious of as a sector is that when you start to push into those 50 to 60 hour weeks, then obviously when you divide that salary by that many hours, it's not perhaps so much per hour. And I think that's something that we really need to try and work out and address. And there's many different factors, both for industry to look at and for government to look at. So We know how congested the roads are. Well, that has an impact on a driver's day, being caught in traffic. You know, if you want what should be a 9 or 10 hour delay, and if they're caught in traffic and then they don't make it back then to do the school run in the afternoon, these are all things that really do impact people's lives. So we need to try and be able to work out how we can make the hours of logistics fit in better with the lifestyles of today.
And it might be, just sorry for interrupting there, it might be that ultimately we have, as consumers, have to accept that things will not be delivered within minutes to our door, or we might have to go to, maybe a cynical remark, to McDonald's ourselves rather than have a person on a motorcycle deliver it for us to eat. You know, I think there's a multimodal consumer impact as well, potentially.
I think as well that I'm sure we'll get onto it, but we talked briefly about automations and maybe think how things can improve. But when you're looking at the other kind of delays that drivers will consistently complain about, and I must admit, it's not just the delays, it's the lack of respect as well that some drivers have when they go to a distribution centre and they could be waiting, and it's really just dead time for them. So in terms of automation, if we can improve the efficiencies in warehouses, so actually we're not wasting drivers' time by waiting for loading and unloading, that could have a really positive effect as well on logistics.
Sure. I mean, it's a podcast for another day's logistics, but actually how we move freight around and the 30% empty run in which people quote and the speed of which, you know, we access and egress locations is really, really important as well. You know, so I think, yes, there's certainly some mileage in that. But just going back specifically to skills, and again, an expression that has been used a lot a process that's been used a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. And I think it was really the previous government's response to a driver shortage challenge 4 years ago, which was the skills boot camps. Oh, yes. I think the word boot camp implies enforcement and training of military, just in my mind. So maybe the title's a bit unfair, but the boot camps, what's going on with the boot camps, Kev? What's happening with them now? Have they been disbanded, or what's happening?
So what the government have done is previously the funding was controlled nationally, so training providers could bid for that money, and if they were successful, they could utilise that money anywhere in England. But now the government have devolved the funding to local authorities, to local councils, and they control what it's spent on. And unfortunately, many of the councils up and down the country are not investing their funding on LGV training, so it's being spent on other courses, and that's having a big impact on the number of drivers being trained. But what I would say to that is the LGV apprenticeship is a really, really good replacement. If we go back when before COVID, before boot camps came in, everyone was using the apprenticeship. Then unfortunately COVID hit and we ended up with a shortfall of about 70,000 driving tests. So the boot camps were brought in to resolve that issue, to catch back up, and they've remained ever since. But the government have now made some real changes to the apprenticeship model, taken away some of the barriers, things like the length of the course. So in the past, previously, an LGV apprenticeship course would last 12 months. And that did put off a lot of employers and learners. But you can now do an apprenticeship in 8 months. The other huge barrier to the apprenticeship was maths and English. So maths and English, now if someone hasn't got a GCSE above grade C or above grade 4 and they're above 19 years of age, it's the employer's choice as to whether they do maths and English or not. And most of the employers that we're working with doing the LGV apprenticeship especially have opted out of doing functional skills. And just while I'm talking about LGV apprenticeships, if you don't mind, if I can just continue. And one of the other barriers with the apprenticeships, again, especially with the LGV course, was a lot of the SMEs, which is predominantly made up of RHA members, were saying to us, well, we haven't got a van, we haven't got a warehouse, so what do we do with the apprentice until they pass the LGV driving test? And what we're saying to them is, if you take on an apprentice under 25 years of age, then you don't have to pay employers' national insurance. So for the first, and generally training providers, most training providers can get an apprentice through the LGV license anywhere between 4 and 6 months. So you're talking about 16 weeks where you've got to find them something to do. So we're saying to employers that, you know, what you need to do is send the apprentice out as a driver's mate, and maybe pay them a reduced rate of pay during the first 16 weeks before they do the driving test, and use the savings, the national insurance savings, to fund the wages during that period. And that, for me, is a viable option for employers, given the reduction in the boot camp model.
And that 16 weeks is about the same length as a boot camp.
It is, yeah. It is.
So I think it's really, it's really informative, Kevin. Obviously, we've known each other for a long time, and we when I first met you, was setting up an academy. It's a business I used to run, and that was very successful at that moment in time.
Yeah.
Because of the time was right, and the funding, well, we self-funded it actually, was correct and the best way to approach. But from a countrywide perspective, Sally, what does the government need to do? What are they not? And this is an RHA policy lead question. What is it that they need to do to actually start to plug this gap and really build some confidence in the industry?
So I'll try and whittle this down to a couple of things. And the first is to actually go ahead with the promise to properly reform the Growth and Skills Levy. So originally, the promise was that the apprenticeship levy would be reformed so you could spend 50% on apprenticeships, 50% on other training. So that messaging has definitely disappeared now. But there is still a plan to be able to allow levy payers to spend their levy funds on other courses, so those short courses. So whether it is a boot camp or whether it's to bring someone into training to do tyre fitting or welding or vehicle inspections. A vehicle inspection course does not take a 12 or even an 8-month apprenticeship. You can do that in a shorter period of time. It gets them in the workshop, but more importantly, it allows them, the fully qualified people, to be able to focus on the things they should. So it's my first ask is to grant the flexibility within the Growth and Skills Levy so they can our businesses can use their funds for the training that best fits their need.
So I think it's fair to say some of the feedback I've had over the years of the levy is viewed as something like a stealth tax, where there's actually no benefit to it, just paying for another government department to use.
And what I would say, it's even worse if you are in Wales, Northern Ireland or Scotland, because where I would say in England, there is a certain transparency. You can actually see what your levy pot is and spend it on apprenticeships. Yeah. If you're in Wales and Scotland, you don't have that. And the Scottish apprenticeships are very much focused on young people. And there is no funded route if you want to train as a driver, and there's really not many options for anything sort of related to road transport in Scotland and Wales. There are also
So if I wanted to self-fund this, sorry to interrupt you, Sally, so if I were to go and get a Class 1 licence, how much would that cost me, Kev? If I was to pay in a commercial?
Yeah, I would say if you are a first-time pass, you're looking anywhere between sort of £3,500. It increases if you go into London, and the prices generally can increase. But if you fail your first and you have to do a second, third test, then it can be running into anywhere £5,000 plus.
Okay, so accessibility of funding is one of the points that obviously, Sally, just going back to your points there, that we as the RHA are very clear on with the Government Make Act, can give some certainty, because again, the feedback we get through our membership in the broader industry, that there are opportunities out there at this moment in time, but there's things that's holding them back is confidence. Confidence to be able to find the driver, or confidence to actually get the planning permission to develop the sites, which is another podcast in itself. But certainly from And the question is that people always say to me, well, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it, Richard? So specifically for you, Kevin, as TRS and obviously our strategic partner and a very good, dynamic, proactive, forward-looking training service, I have to say,
Thank you.
which you've demonstrated that over the years. What are you doing about it? If I was myself, what are you doing about it, Kev? You're running a training school. What are you as RHA training provider doing about it?
So we set up with the RHA, RHA Skills. It was set up this year, and the main purpose of RHA Skills is to provide information, advice and guidance to employers, RHA members, haulage operators, to explain to them how they can use the funding to cover the costs of the apprenticeship courses that they want to deliver. And since we set this up, we've attended, we've done webinars, we've gone along to the regional briefings, RHA briefings, talking to members. We're part of the Skills Council, where a lot of employers come along to that event. We send out regular articles about the all the changes and that the government have brought into apprenticeship funding. So articles in the Roadway magazines, and we're happy to have sort of Teams calls or meetings with any operators, line managers, candidates that are coming on the courses to educate them on how they can use the apprenticeship levy system to fund the courses. Some of the other things that we're doing on the recruitment side. So if an employer can't engage an experienced driver and does decide to go down the apprenticeship route, then we offer to help the employer to identify candidates, so we can work with the employer, draft adverts, place them on the National Apprenticeship Service jobs website. We can create posters to display around sites and to attract upskilling. If they want to upskill existing staff, then we can send posters to the site. So we can do all of these things to help the employers identify candidates for the courses they want to engage them on.
I mean, one thing, and thanks, Kevin, and one thing we have, as the RHA, we have a training school in Scotland. And unfortunately, we've recently announced that we've had to withdraw from the apprenticeship funded training, particularly for LGV drivers, because the process is slightly different up in Scotland. And you referred to it before, Sally, in terms of whilst we're 4 nations, 3 of those nations have got a different way of funding, licence acquisition, which brings a complexity in itself, because quite a lot of our members have got a depot in each nation or operate in each nation. And one of the reasons why we withdrew from the Scotland market was it was commercially unviable, but also the actual application of the apprenticeship scheme was ridiculously administratively heavy, to a point where I had to employ a team of admins just to draw, and this is to train 150 drivers. So that's more of an information point than anything else. Question for you, Sally, you alluded to it before. So how can technology and AI and innovation help with the training particular process, rather than, we're not talking about autonomous vehicles, talk about the training, accessibility training? What do you think the opportunities are around that?
So I think one of the benefits, one of the things that came out of COVID is that the way that we train people has fundamentally changed pre and post. And we really have adapted very, very well to how we train people. And I think the great thing about that is that it also recognizes that everybody learns differently. So you can do classroom training, but actually there's loads of online training. There's video clips. There's lots of different options now that we can utilize to train people. We've got our own driver simulator going around and helping that piece. So I think from that perspective, AI, I think, could be completely change the way that we train people, and it can really take into account different people's neurodiversity. I think when you're looking at it from an efficiencies within businesses, we saw some great presentations at the Future Forum of just actually how there are some really quite easy steps that the businesses can make, which will help their transport planners, their maintenance teams, and potentially free that part of the time as well for them to be able to work on other things. But I think that there is we're very much at the start of what AI can do, whether that is from the training perspective and how you can utilize it, and then adapting your different training for different people, to then within the office and how it will to be utilized there. But it's an exciting time. But I don't think that we should be saying to government it's going to solve every single one of our skills shortage problems.
No, I agree. I mean, one of the most frustrating, good bit of word, challenging lines that I get back from government talking about the driver shortages. Well, autonomous vehicles will be here soon. I'm going, autonomous vehicles in the HGV world. I think there has to be a realism, a pragmatism, understanding of exactly where you're on that process. I've got 2 more questions before we conclude. If you could give a very simple, succinct message to Patrick McFadden, which I think is, on what he needs to do to support the industry. And we're not overstating the point. There's a skills shortages across the economy. And we've highlighted the fact there's particularly one around drivers of HGV and coaches, actually. And I believe vans to some degree. And it's a key economic enabler to drive economic growth, and to drive enterprise, and to start to develop the UK as a country back. What would the message be to Patrick McFadden, Sally, from your perspective?
So I think we touched on one of the difficulties earlier, and the fact that skills has devolved. So the thing that I'm really hoping with the switch from Department for Education to Department for Work and Pensions is DWP have a UK-wide brief. And if they can help bridge the skills gap via each devolved country, I think that will really help. And it's not saying that skills is always going to be devolved, but we do see some ridiculous situations with some of our members where just because they're slightly across the border, they're not getting the same training access that someone 5 miles, their competitor 5 miles down the road does. So I think for me that's a big ask to Patrick McFadden.
Well, I gotta think of you. I talked the other day about this, where there's a member who's trained some of these mechanics in Wales, and they got to go to Birmingham to get the training. So it was somebody I was talking to, and there was just a ridiculous nature of that. Kevin, same question to you. If you could say, Patrick McFadden, can you just change this one thing, or please consider in your thinking from a training perspective, would it be anything different to what Sally said, or would it be another message?
It would be the same message as Sally's just said, to be honest with you, Richard. Yeah, definitely be the same message.
I think, sorry, just to hold on, one of the areas that you've been doing quite a bit more of recently is the swaps of the sector-based work academies with DWP.
Yeah.
And I think that's an area that actually, on the face of it, you could easily take to all 4 nations.
Yeah. For the HGV driving, especially, sector-based work academy programs, targeting unemployed people, to give them a skill that they can use to find sort of long-term sustainable employment. And sector-based work academy, we do them now for warehousing, forklift truck driving. That is another funding training initiative that could be used to address the driver shortage.
I would love as well for it to be opened up to it for kids getting their driving license, because that's a problem we've got coming several years down the road, is the fact that there are a lot of young people who aren't actually taking their license, their car license.
Yeah.
Kevin, Sally, thank you very much for joining today. I think you can see the passion and enthusiasm and understanding of the subject that you brought to the conversation, so thank you for that. I think to summarise, the challenge is about engagement, about understanding, about a clear plan, and the pragmatism that allows the future generations to come into the industry. Because let's be honest, it's the future generations that will be driving the trucks, everything. And if anybody wants to know anything else about RHA Skills, or fundamentally got any questions or points to raise, please go to our website and we'll put you in contact with Sally and Kevin. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.